Tonight's video is deductive reasoning, which the objective is to use the law of detachment and the law of syllogism. Deductive reasoning is the process of reasoning logically given statements or facts to a conclusion. So, when you're doing the difference between inductive and deductive, inductive is patterns and deductive is facts. So that's the difference between the two of them. So with this law of detachment, if we have the hypothesis, and that's true, and then the conclusion is true, then we know that each separate part is also true. So here are some examples. What can we conclude about the given statements? If you are a grandma, then you have kids. Well, we're saying that Mabel is a grandma, so we can conclude that Mabel has kids. So the next one, if a student gets an A in a final exam, then the student will pass the course. So Felicia got an A on her history final, so that means Felicia will pass the course. Woo! Go Felicia! If two angles are adjacent, then they share a common vertex. So they're saying that angle 1 and 2 share a common vertex. So we can conclude that angles 1 and 2 are going to be adjacent because they share the common vertex. Remember, if the conditional statement is true, if two angles are adjacent, then they share a common vertex. If that's true, and we know that the P is true, no matter what, the Q is always going to be true. Get used to me saying P's and Q's. Next, we have the law of
syllogism.
And the law of
syllogism
tells us that if we know that two conditional statements are true, then the conclusion of one statement is the hypothesis of the other. So if P then Q is true, and if Q then R is true, then we're always going to say that if P then R is true. So now we look at these statements and we say, if a figure is a square, then the figure is a rectangle. If the figure is a rectangle, then the figure has 4 sides. Those are both true statements, so I could say, if a figure is a square, then the figure has 4 sides. And if P then Q, if Q then R, then P and R. What? What did she say? Just say that doesn't even make sense. So if we look at this next one, if you do gymnastics, then you are flexible. And if you do ballet, then you are flexible. Does that follow our standard? No, because it has to be if P then Q and if Q then R is true. So we can't make any conclusion from this because it doesn't follow our standard. And the first one we had if P then Q, and then we had Q then R. So that's why we could say if a figure is a square, then the figure has 4 sides. It has to follow that pattern. So looking at this statement, what can I conclude, or what can I have as a conclusion? If you live in Accra, then you live in Ghana. So that looks like a P then Q. If you live in Ghana, so that's a Q, then you live in Africa. That's my R. I'm telling you that Alyssa lives in Accra. Well, that was my P. And since it followed the rule of if P then Q and if Q then R, then I could say Alyssa lives in Africa. So we will be practicing many examples of this. I understand that it could be confusing with all of this language in math, but you've got to get used to it because we are going to be starting proofs next, and it just gets a little bit harder. So have a wonderful night, wonderful day, wonderful evening. Just be wonderful.